Good morning, everybody. About a minute early before we get started on this live stream. So let me know where you're from. Drop it in. If you're up early with me, drop in a note in the chat, and maybe I'll be able to peek at it real quick. Coming to you live from Atlanta, Georgia. It's early. We're getting going on this week, and we're going to jump into the topic in just about. Let me see. I'm going to wait for another more or less 1 minute, and we'll get started. Let me know where you're from. Again, drop it in the chat and we'll go from there. I think you're gonna like today's topic, and so I think we're almost there. I think we're at the 8 o'clock mark. So, just trying to get up and just waking up early. I do get up early. I don't know about you. Do you wake up early? I typically get up about maybe 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. So, I like to do my early morning reading. By the way, FYI, what am I reading? I'm reading How to Think About AI. That's the topic I'm reading on today. Just reading books about AI and technology. That seems to be my latest whim when it comes to, what's on my brain now, what I want to absorb. So anyway, it's the 8 o'clock hour, and I think it's time to get into it. Let me just go full screen here, and let's get going. Welcome to the Monday Morning Sales Workout. Now, again, this Monday Morning Sales Workout is for managers who are looking to train their salespeople, and you need something to do every week to kind of get them going and maybe focused on some specific aspect of selling that you want them to get better. So go to by the way, I just want to go to the slides here real quick. And so let me see if I can get this. There you go. There it is. So again, today we're going to talk about getting the right people in the room, getting the decision makers in the room. So whether it's B2B or B2C, one of the challenges your salespeople might have, Mr. Manager, Mrs. Manager, is getting the right people in the room to make a buying decision. So this is an exercise you can do with them because we know the following. Let's go through some facts here. By the way, you can download a worksheet. All these workouts come with a worksheet. So go to victorantonio.com, MMSW, which stands for Monday Morning Sales Workout. You can download today's worksheet. And again, the goal here is for you to use that worksheet to work with your sales team on a specific aspect of selling. In this case, how to get the right decision makers in the room. Again, whether it's B2B or B2C, download the worksheet, go to the website. And by the way, you can also purchase the 52-week program that I have. So check that out while you're on the site. Now, let's kind of get into it. Facts. Let's start with that. Facts. Close rates go up when decision makers are present. Can we all agree with that? In other words, if we have the decision makers in the room, and if it's a B2B scenario, if we have all the stakeholders in a room, the chance of closing the deal or advancing the sale go up dramatically. If it's a B2C, for example, having the husband and the wife or the couple in general be there, the homeowners, they're more likely close, they're on the spot. So again, having the decision makers in both scenarios increases close rates. Number two, it also reduces sales cycle. Now, we don't think about this a lot, but sales cycle is basically how long it takes you to close a deal. And again, let me state the obvious. If all the decision makers are in the room in either scenario, you're going to shorten that sales cycle. If they're not, you're going to get things like, well, let me think about it. In a B2C scenario, it could be, let me think about it. Let me talk to my spouse. In a B2B scenario, it could be, well, let me get together with the other stakeholders and then see what we think. And then, how that works. You know that phrase, time kills all deals. So what we want to try to do is get all the decision makers in the room so they can make a buying decision. Fact number three, last one, and that is if you're in the business where people can cancel a service or maybe even a product, right? Again, cancellation rates go down when all the decision makers are present. So again, there's real motivation here to try to get the decision makers in the room. So as you're talking to your sales team, remind them of these three facts that again, close rates go up, sales cycles are short, and cancellation rates go down. This is why we have to kind of practice on how to get all the decision makers in the room. So now let's talk about from fact to tact. In other words, ways to get decision makers in the group. Now, again, these are going to be discussion points for you to have with your sales team in your Monday morning sales workout. So I would bring up these three things. Let's look at a B2B scenario. One of the first things we have to do in a B2B scenario is, again, qualify decision makers through open-ended questions. For example, ask questions like this. These are very standard in sales, right? Who else needs to be there in order to make a buying decision? In other words, who else is involved in the decision-making process that should be in the meeting? So let's say you're selling a software package, a SaaS product. And one of the questions you want to ask your contact in the company is, who else needs to be there or who else needs to see this? What other stakeholders should be involved in that meeting? Or you might ask a more general question, say, for example, like, walk me through how your decision-making process works. Now you're asking that question, walk me through how your decision-making process works. So as you're walking through it, you can identify other potential stakeholders, decision makers that need to be in the room, and then you're going to try to get them to be invited. Number two, use social proof. Now, this is interesting. It's always good to talk to, let's say, again, B2B scenario. I'm talking to my contact, my person in that company, and I could say something like this. Here's what I found, that when the stakeholders are in the room, the chances of this project succeeding or working out increase dramatically. Let me give you an example. Here's a company over here, ABC company we worked with, and we had this stakeholder, that, and third stakeholder in one room. And what happened was each person was able to voice their agenda, what they wanted, and then we were able to align the product to what they wanted and also level set the expectations. Again, language like that, social proof, we've worked with other companies, and here's why it works to have all the decision makers in the room or other stakeholders. The last one, offering value-specific benefits for each stakeholder. Now, kind of like part two of number two, and that is like when you're talking to different stakeholders, let's say again, it's a software package you're selling to the company. Now, it can impact not only operations, so you want to have the operations stakeholder in the room. It can also impact, for example, let's say marketing. So you want to have that stakeholder in the room, and maybe it will impact, I don't know, financing or even a technology piece, right? So you want to have the CTO or the CIO there. And then you can explain how having each of these people in the room provides real value. So for example, you can say, love to have the chief technology officer there because I want them to see how this is going to work and impact how they actually implement their systems. And here's why it's in their best interest to be there. Talking finance, again, here's why this software package will impact finance, and that's why they should be there. So again, use those reasons to get all these other stakeholders to come or be present. So again, let's walk through them. Qualify the decision-making process. How does the decision-making process work? Number two, social proof. Having everybody in the room basically makes for a more, I guess, homogeneous situation where people agree on things and we can move the project forward with higher degree of success or probability of success. And number three is kind of talk to each person, each stakeholder, and let them know why each person should be there and what's their interest. In other words, what's their why and what's in it for them. If I can tell the technology officer what's in it for them and why they should be there, again, that's a good thing. Finance, marketing, so forth and so on. Let's move over to B2C for those of you who are in the B2C industry. Now, this is always a tricky one because, again, it's always trying to get the spouse or the other person there. So again, think of residential sales. You're a contractor, let's say roofing, pool, whatever it may be. And so the first one is making sure, this is obvious, is that you schedule the meeting with the spouse there. So you're always going to ask, when will your husband or wife be there so you can both be present? And then you give reasons as to why. Here's why it's good or necessary that both are present because, and then you insert your reasons. One is that they're going to have different sets of questions. Number two, it's always harder for a person to retransmit information. For example, let's say you talk to the husband, right? And the husband says, I got to talk to my wife. Well, we've all played the telephone game in school, right? If the more ears it goes through, it gets distorted. Well, in this case, it's almost the same thing. I'm going to require the husband to remember everything I said and then transmit that to his wife. And that never really works out. So you want to explain to the client, the buyer, or the resident owner, is that you want to be both there because there's going to be questions for both of you. And it's going to be one of those inclusive conversations. Number two, use a family-focused strategy. Like always talk about why this is good for the future, why both being there is actually a good thing. Now, one of the questions I always get is, Victor, what if the other person simply cannot be there? Well, here's what I do. I almost call it this invisible rabbit, strategy. And that is if you're talking to let's say the wife in this case, right? And the husband isn't there. What I always do is imagine like the invisible rabbit, right? That the spouse is there, the husband is there. So when I'm talking to the wife and I said, okay, here's what I would recommend here. She said, that's a good idea, Victor. And then I said, yes, but what would your husband think? Or when you discuss this feature, what did your husband say? So in other words, I use inclusive language, almost as if the husband were there. So again, always include the other person in the conversation. Well, what did your husband say? Well, what did your wife think about that when you talked about it last time? And the last one here is, again, be flexible with your scheduling. If someone says, my husband can't be there because he's going to be at work, then be flexible in your scheduling. Maybe schedule for the evening, or dare I say, schedule for the weekend. So again, the goal here is to try to be flexible and really get the person to have both people there, or you to have both people there, so you can have a better conversation. So as back to you managers, as you're talking to your salespeople, whether it's B2B or B2C, discuss some strategies like what do they currently do? And then also talk about what I've mentioned already. Talk about how the close rate increases when the decision makers are in the room. Talk about how cancellation rates go down and sales cycles are shorter. Sometimes salespeople need to hear this because they think it's not that important, but it is. It's important to the close rate. It's important to your revenue. And so again, on this one, download the worksheet. Again, the worksheet for you managers will walk you through kind of what we did now, but also walk you through some questions that I have for you to ask your salespeople. So go to victorantonio.com, Monday morning sales workout, download the worksheet, and we will see you